Shakespeare wrote that the evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. Many people believe that those men who did evil and unspeakable deeds from ages gone by are often living on in apparitions, sightings, unexplained perceptions. Their souls are unable to sleep. There is literally no sleep for the wicked. And evildoers are damned to face eternal punishment. Could it be that those souls who caused the most distress could still be casting dark shadows from the past onto the face of the earth in the present? That would certainly explain a number of strange and eerie happenings witnessed by many. Could they really be seeing shadows from the past created by the evil souls who just cannot find peace? England can be one of the most picturesque places on earth, with its stately homes, castles and palaces and bountiful greenery. You would not be blamed for believing that all is right with the world and forgetting all about spirits of malevolence or anything as disturbing as a ghostly presence. But even the most benign and peaceful of surroundings can have neglected corners, locked rooms, or silent, forgotten spaces where shadows from the past cast a long and dreadful darkness. Those shadows can cause a chill to run up your spine and a feeling of dread to hang heavy in the air. This is Fulham Palace, nestling peacefully alongside the River Thames in a picturesque corner of West London. For almost 1,000 years, it has been the stately and elegant home of the bishops of London. The role of Bishop of London is one of the highest ecclesiastical posts in the kingdom, and with it comes two homes: Lambeth Palace, which is close to the centre of government in Westminster, and this grand home, which when it was first occupied in the 9th century was in a rural area some 7 to 8 miles west of Lambeth. The old River Thames still winds past the beautiful grounds of the old palace just over the river there, but now it's known as Bishop's Park and is mainly used for recreational purposes. In late Victorian times, the palace donated the land to the local council, and since then it has been a great place to come and play. When I was a small boy, my mother used to bring me here, and I would somehow make my way with a mixture of doggy paddle and wading across the pond to the small island. I loved it here. But I had no idea at all that right next door was the spiritual haunt of one of London's most notorious holy men. Despite its beautiful demeanour on a sunny day, Bishop's Palace in Fulham has dark secrets and a history of unexplained phenomena and puzzling happenings. Many of them stem from the time of Bishop Bonner and his despicable deeds, as one of its curators explains.
I actually first started working here in 1992 when the museum opened, and then I spent 23 years working here until I retired. You would see the different birds, the different animals, and I always used to tell people it was like coming to work in the country. If we go back 500, 600 years, this was actually in the country. London stopped at Park Lane. You had the hunting fields in Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens with the palace, but that's where London stopped. And this was in the country, and the bishop's residence was actually called his country house. It was his country manor house. It's called a palace because the bishops of London were known as the princes of the church, and princes lived in palaces, so it became known as Fulham Palace. But it was a family retreat. The family would live here, and if they didn't need to be in London, then this was their home. But it was also used for education. People would come here ahead of ordination. They would be attending lessons. They would be talking with the bishop.
But as the years went by, the atmosphere at the palace could swing wildly from the picturesque and the benign to something far more chilling.
I, as well as some of the staff and volunteers that worked here, all had various experiences of unexplained things, whether it be noises or smells or the feeling of coldness, hearing footsteps when no one is there. There are so many unexplained things that happen in the palace. One of the unusual ones that I experienced was in the room which is next door to this room. It was a particularly quiet day. There was no one in the grounds, there was no one in the museum, and I was working alongside a volunteer, and all of a sudden we could smell this very, very strong, rich tobacco smell. We were so intrigued by it, I actually went around the building and searched to see if anyone was smoking, but there was no one in the building. He went outside and walked around the outside windows, and there was no one outside. There was no one smoking, but we could smell the smoke. There's been various things put forward which I don't really accept. I mean, one is that sometimes the conditions can create smells rising from the floorboards or underneath the ground, but I think tobacco smell is quite distinctive, and I don't think it could be replicated by a natural event. There was one bishop that it was recorded as dying of a tobacco-related illness. And this was quite early on when tobacco came into the country. So whether or not there's a connection, who knows?
One particular spirit seems to have left his mark on this palace more than any other. His notoriety is such, but now only one really clear picture of him still exists, and in it, this so-called holy man is shown whipping a poor prisoner in the grounds here at Fulham Palace. His name was Bishop Bonner.
Talking about Bishop Bonner, yes, the infamous Bishop Bonner. Very staunch Catholic, and under Mary he almost became judge and jury to Protestants. It is known that he used the Great Hall. He also used the old medieval chapel where he held inquisitions. He interrogated them. He kept them prisoner in what they refer to as the old coal cellar in the building. In the Great Hall, he actually held inquisitions. He had a room that overlooked the courtyards, the Tudor courtyards, and he would sit in his room and watch the Protestants being flogged in the courtyard. In the garden, he had an arbour, so on a nice, pleasant, sunny day like today, he would sit in his arbour, and the Protestants would be brought out, and he would sit there and watch them being flogged. flogging of a Protestant. As I say, he was such a staunch Catholic that anyone that had an alternative faith was evil. And he was trying to beat that evilness out of the people. Certainly, we believe probably some were executed on this site.
For some, Fulham Palace, the home, the courtroom, and the scene of the acts of barbarism that he carried out is still a place that resounds to the dark shadows that Bishop Bonner has left behind.
The most famous sighting, and the one that everybody says is Bishop Bonner, is a caretaker that was living on site, was in the Great Hall, and a bishop walked into the Great Hall. He started to proceed across the Great Hall. Then he carried on across the Great Hall and disappeared through a wall. Where he actually disappeared, in earlier drawings of the palace, we know that there was actually a door there. So it was presumably Bishop Bonner's route that he walked across the Great Hall and through this door.
An old goods entrance is actually all that remains of a long tunnel linking the palace to the site of Bonner's family house. And when archaeologists cleared the tunnel in the last century, they discovered within it probably the worst scene they could imagine. The walls of the tunnel were lined with skeletons, skulls, and the remains of the bishop's victims. Not accorded a respectful burial, they were left as a gruesome reminder of the bishop's reign of terror here at the palace.
The tunnel story has existed for hundreds of years. Bishop Bonner is alleged to have had a tunnel that went from here way across the lawn towards Fulham village as it was then, and came up near the pub that is called the Golden Lion. Close to the Golden Lion was allegedly a house where Bishop Bonner's mother lived.
So what was Bonner really like? Tudor England was the high watermark of activity in this part of London. The King's favourite councillor, Thomas Cromwell, lived just across the river in Putney, and one of Cromwell's fellow followers of Wolsey was enjoying an equally rapid rise to the top in the court of Henry VIII. Torture was an everyday occurrence in the 16th century, a bloody era when religious wars shook England. Among the most accomplished practitioners in the art of torture was actually a cleric, Bishop Edmund Bonner. And although he was a man of God, Bonner enjoyed inflicting pain. But say this for him, Bonner was an equal opportunity torturer. During the reign of Protestant Henry VIII, Bonner tormented Catholics. When Henry's Catholic daughter Mary Tudor came to power, Bonner switched sides and tortured Protestants. Because his victims felt he was doing Satan's work, he earned the nickname the Devil's Dancing Bear. But Bonner was really doing the bidding of Queen Mary Tudor. When Mary succeeded her father Henry VIII, she was a woman with an axe to grind, both metaphorically and
on a rather less prosaic level. Henry VIII had divorced Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, declaring Mary illegitimate and outlawing the Catholic faith. Queen Mary now had the power to get her own back on her father and take revenge. She reinstated Catholicism as the only religion of England. Subjects who didn't renounce their Protestant faith soon had reason to call her Bloody Mary. History has not been kind to Mary, even though she was a remarkable character. Her mother ensured she was well educated, if not actually prodigious. She was certainly extremely bright and showed typical Tudor traits in fighting for and winning the crown. But her sobriquet of Bloody Mary has stuck. But then she did do her best to earn it. If Protestants refused to become Catholics, they would be tortured. If they still refused, they would be burned at the stake as heretics. It was a medieval inquisition, and Bishop Bonner, the Devil's Dancing Bear, was Bloody Mary's enforcer. Hiding behind religious vestments, the burly former lawyer fulfilled his dark purpose.
And Fulham Palace was where he chose to undertake his dark deeds for much of his time as Bishop of London. When Mary appointed him Bishop of London in 1553, Bonner set up headquarters both in the Tower of London and here in Fulham Palace, where he created his own religious courtroom in what became the Great Hall. He eagerly executed his work as heretic hunter. The Devil's Dancing Bear carried out the wishes of his royal mistress with a horrifying attention to detail. Queen Mary made sure Bishop Bonner had a steady supply of suspects for questioning. He held them in custody until they either repented or were condemned. One way or another, Bonner always got a result. Despite his relentless cruelty, Bonner insisted he only wanted to show people the error of their ways. Bonner drew up a list of over 100 questions on religious beliefs. If a suspect got one wrong, then it was the terror of the torture chamber.
So, Richard, I know thou hast no fault inside thyself, but hast been led astray by those of evil intent that work against the price of church. So tell me their names. Tell me who has led you on, else the heat you now feel shall burn within me and purge my sin in the fires that burn.
Other times, more elaborate methods were required. There were red-hot irons and thumbscrews, bilboes to crush the ankles, and the brakes to snap off teeth. But the most popular instrument of torture was always the rack.
Bonner's evil knew no bounds. He personally supervised every detail of every case, from the first examination to the horrible execution.
Eventually, everyone broke under Bonner's relentless torment. If they were shown to be enemies of the Catholic Church, they were condemned to burn at the stake. In his first year in office, Bonner sentenced 89 men and women to be burned alive for their religious beliefs. By the beginning of 1555, there were probably no more than 200 active Protestants remaining in London, but that was 200 too many to satisfy the bloodthirsty Queen. She scolded Bonner, sending him a letter stating that he was not working fast enough, rooting out heretics. Eager to please his employer, Bonner redoubled his efforts. He sent out spies and finally discovered a group of Protestants who were meeting in secret. Their deacon was almost immediately arrested. One of the parishioners, Cuthbert Simpson, consoled the gathering, but he was himself then arrested on charges of attending church services in English rather than Latin, a charge that was punishable by death. Simpson was taken to the Tower to be tortured, but the Protestant deacon would prove to be a challenge for the sadistic Devil's Dancing Bear. Simpson's diary described what happened next.
The following Thursday, I was commanded to give the names of those who came to the English service. I answered that I would declare nothing. In consequence of my refusal, I was set upon the rack.
As the ropes pulled tight, the muscles and joints of Simpson's legs were stretched and pulled to breaking point. When Simpson passed out, he was revived. After 3 hours of torture, Simpson was unable to walk and had to be carried back to the cell. The following week, Simpson was brought from his cell to face Bonner again, and again he refused to name those who had worshipped with him. Simpson's forefingers were bound together and an arrow was put between them. The sharp arrow was then driven between them and Simpson had to endure the excruciating pain. Relentlessly determined to break the religious man, Bonner forced Simpson into the rack twice more. Twice more, he refused to divulge the names of his congregation. By now, even the brutal Bonner had to admit a grudging admiration for the strength of Simpson's convictions. Bonner later wrote,
I affirm that if he were not a heretic, he is a man of the greatest patience that ever came before me. Thrice was he racked, and yet never have I seen him broken.
Bonner might have admired Simpson's bravery, but mere strength of character alone was not enough to save Simpson from a grisly fate.
Mighty soul, recant now, though it be too late to save the body. Save thy almighty soul, recant now. Never. Then God have mercy on thee. Burn him.
Bonner had Simpson tied to the stake and burned alive on March the 28th, 1558. The brave Cuthbert Simpson joined a long line of martyrs to the cause of religious tolerance. But the Devil's Dancing Bear was nearing the end of his cruel career.
It's hard not to feel an element of schadenfreude for poor old Bonner, but in medieval England, justice could swing both for you and against you, depending, as it did, on the whim of the monarch. And Bonner's shocking acts were not to go unpunished. Having burned, hanged and tortured hundreds of innocent victims, Bishop Bonner, the Devil's Dancing Bear, would discover how quickly fortunes could change when you rely on the whims and wishes of a monarch. He left the skeletons of many of his victims lining the tunnel he had constructed from his torture chamber in the palace to his family house some 200 yards away. A tunnel he walked along every day, gazing upon his macabre souvenirs. But Bonner was soon asked to face his own moment of truth.
When his benefactor, Queen Mary, died in 1558 in St James's Palace, having condemned over 280 Protestants to the stake, her younger sister, Queen Elizabeth, became queen. Religious persecutions stopped. Queen Elizabeth saw Bonner as a sadist and ordered him to resign as a bishop. When he arrogantly refused, Bonner was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. Now the once torturer was a prisoner there himself. He sat in the same dark cell where many of his victims had waited for their appointment with pain and death. For almost a decade, Bonner could contemplate the 450 people he had tortured and killed in the name of God. But then the bishop's own time of reckoning came. Surrounded by squalor and filth, the devil's dancing bear died in 1569. His last days were spent not in the genteel surroundings of Fulham Palace, but in the debtor's prison at Marshalsea. Bonner accounted for hundreds of souls, and some believe they make their continued presence felt, throwing a long shadow from the past into these stately surroundings by the river. But others believe the unexplained phenomena that occur here are not caused by the victims of the bishop, but by Bonner himself, his soul eternally troubled by the terrible deeds he undertook in the name of religion and the awful actions he inflicted. His soul is unable to find peace, endlessly retreading the fatal walk he took across the courtroom, the scene of his worst excesses, and down to the dark passages underneath the palace where so many of his victims suffered. But Bonner's is not the only spirit to remind visitors of past episodes in the palace's history. A strange apparition has appeared before a security man here in the grounds. When he went to complete his usual locking up procedures one summer's evening, as the sun started to fade, he was conscious of a presence. He felt as if someone was watching him. From somewhere, he was aware of a strangely clad young woman, all in white, and she had emerged from the gardens and was approaching the gateway. Unable to think clearly, he struggled with the lock and then asked her what she wanted. What was she doing all alone at the end of the day?
What are you doing here?
I'm looking for my home.
What?
And then, when he turned around, she was gone.
Look.
It hasn't been well recorded, but there's been several sightings of a young lady walking in the grounds. Whether she was lost or whether she was looking for something, I don't know, but certainly there has been persistent stories about the young lady walking in the grounds. One possibility is a relative of Bishop Louth, who during dinner one evening, she was passing a cup of tea and she collapsed and died. And the conjecture is that it is her that walks the grounds because she died suddenly and she's not at rest. Personally, the time that I experienced it, I was with a visitor and we had been talking about this young lady actually. And as we walked across this very room, we both walked through a cold spot. And the visitor looked at me and I looked at the visitor and we both said almost simultaneously, did you feel that? It was such a sudden change of temperature. It went icy cold. And the only thing I can think of is that if the young lady was responsible, was it her that we felt? Did we actually walk through her spirit even?
Could she be one of Bonner's lost souls? Or is there another explanation? In the late 16th century, Queen Elizabeth I followed the Tudor tradition of taking a royal progress to visit her kingdom and to be seen by her subjects. On one such progress, returning to London, she overnighted at the Bishop's Palace. Of course, she had a huge retinue of soldiers, statesmen and servants with her. But even so, during the night, someone from outside the palace sneaked into her chambers and stole 2 of her belongings, including an ornament belonging to the Queen herself. The chambermaid who was on duty that evening was completely devastated that someone had got so close to the monarch and had stolen such a valuable belonging of Her Majesty's. The following day, the young chambermaid's body was found hanging from a tree in the grounds. Such was her shame. She was clad from head to feet in her simple white maid's clothing. Could the lady in white be a spiritual reminder of that poor maidservant? Whatever you believe, she is not alone. Bonner accounted for literally hundreds of souls who make their continued presence felt, casting their long shadows across the years to these stately surroundings by the river. Bizarrely, exactly the same story, with a few major differences, emanates from the beautiful East Sussex town of Rye. On August the 11th, 1573, Queen Elizabeth I, along with her whole court, visited Rye, then the most important port in Sussex.
Well, a royal progress was really to show herself to the people. The Queen had to be seen by the people. She was a sort of icon, really. She'd be on her litter, in her carriage, looking like a painting, literally, and with the makeup, the lot. And she would have been staying with various courtiers en route. I know that she stopped at Northiam on her way here. She must have arrived here sort of towards evening, because I believe she had a meal at Northiam underneath the old oak tree outside the pub at Northiam. And the pub itself cooked the meal for her, and she danced on the village green. She was a great dancer, Queen Elizabeth I. She wasn't an absolute spring chicken in 1573, not by the standards of the 16th century, but she used to love dancing, all the latest dances. And that was where she left her shoes behind, of course, at Northiam, her green silk slippers.
Amazingly, those shoes have remained in this part of the town ever since, kept in one of the town councillor's houses, and the area here has subsequently been called Rye Royal after the event. But that night, the mood in the royal court was soured when it was discovered that Queen Elizabeth's favourite band of pearls was missing, a beautiful and distinctive piece of jewellery. It was no longer to be found in her jewel chest. Her maidservants and ladies in waiting searched high and low for the missing necklace. In fact, the whole town was turned upside down. The search focused on this lane, Traders' Passage, where despite the best efforts of everyone, they could not find the missing necklace. And as at Bishop's Palace, the maidservant responsible
is said to have taken her own life as penance. Her spirit can still be seen scouring the lane in Rye, looking for the missing pearls. She is not the only spirit in Rye unable to find rest. Just around the corner from Traders' Passage is one of the most famous haunted pubs in Britain, the renowned Mermaid Inn. With the introduction of customs duties by Edward I, the town of Rye had become a warren of secret pathways, hidden passages and hidden priest holes, a hive of illicit activities. Rye fell under the control of an illegal industry, the industry of smuggling.
There were several gangs. The worst gang of all was the Hawkhurst gang, led by George Gray. He was able to have 500 men at his side just for the asking. And if a customs officer came in, they'd know exactly what to do and how to deal with him. I believe one of his, the people they caught was actually nailed to his own front door for informing on them. One of our ghostly sightings, we have a lady in grey who's been seen on several occasions walking along the corridors. And she's supposed to be a barmaid here once who got involved with the smugglers romantically. But she was actually caught informing on them and they had her killed. And it's supposed to be her spirit that walks the corridors here today.
It was not just goods like brandy, tobacco and tea which were smuggled. Secret passages and chambers, like this priest hole up a chimney, were perfect for smuggling Roman Catholics in and out of the country. Even the old tuck shop had a pulley system to hide away the occasional barrel of brandy. The customs officers were regularly outnumbered and outmanoeuvred.
This is where the wretched customs officers had their headquarters. They had the most dreadful time because there are far too few of them and far too many very, very cunning smugglers. There were various gangs. The Hawkhurst gang is the most famous one. They would do a smuggling job, escape the customs officers, these wretched people, and then later on in the evening they'd be found round the corner at the Mermaid, just drinking and laughing at the expense of these people. The smuggled goods having been moved through pretty quick to some fence a bit further north, and of course the attics of Rye. They were the way the smugglers could escape the customs officers, because they knew their way. All the attics of Rye interlink to this day. They could go up the back stairs, through the attics, and then nonchalantly emerge from another house on, round the corner and disappear.
So whether it be Bishop's Palace here in southwest London or the beautiful town of Rye in East Sussex, the spirits of those who have had evil done unto them, as well as those who did the evil, seem unable to rest.
The victims of Bonner's worst work, or the innocent and trusting barmaid who thought she was doing the right thing all those centuries ago, are still believed by many to walk endlessly down the years.
They have become another chapter in England's historic hauntings.